Turning Tides is an Antiks entertainment production. You can find the show on social media at the Turning Tides Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube, and at Turning Tides Pod on Bluesky and Mastodon. For more information, or if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or collaborating, please contact us at the Turning Tides Podcast at gmail.com. Thank you. Warning. This episode of Turning Tides contains depictions of murder, sexual assault, war, violence, torture, child abuse, suicide, and genocide.
And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. The Book of Genesis, chapter 21, verse 34. This series will attempt to trace the many interactions, usurpations, and movements which occurred throughout historic Palestine, starting with its earliest beginnings all the way to the present day and ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of the native Palestinian people by a colonizing force. This exploration of history aims to showcase the strength and dexterity of the Palestinian people, be they Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Samaritan, atheist, or any other faith, and to contradict the claim put forward by European Zionists that Palestine was ever a land without a people. The reality is that since human beings first began to read and write about their past, Palestine has always been present in their discussions and literature. Greek historians like Herodotus, Roman historians like Tacitus, and the Roman Jewish historian Flavius Josephus mention Palestine extensively in their writings. All three of the above-mentioned historians wrote that Palestine existed around or near its present-day geographic location. Its eastern border was the Jordan River, and its western border was the Mediterranean Sea. This is where the phrase, "from the river to the sea," originated. Its northern border was ill-defined, but the Litani River, located in present-day Lebanon, usually served as the one true physical barrier for movement. Palestine's southern borders were the Sinai Desert and the Wadi al-Arish, the rivulet located to the southwest of Rafah. Due to these mediocre defensive boundaries, as well as Palestine's position between two continents, Palestine has always been a land marked by movement and transition. It is also one of the most disputed pieces of land in the history of the world. To put it in perspective for those of us living in the good old US of A, Palestine is about the size of New Jersey. Despite its small size, it is one of the most diverse areas in the entire Eastern Hemisphere. For a long time, Palestine was the site at which members of the three major Abrahamic religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, spent vast amounts of time intermingling and cohabitating peacefully alongside one another. This changed when warlords, kings, and emperors began using religion to justify their violent takeovers and pillaging. With the rise of 19th century nationalist movements, the subsequent adoption of Zionism, and the creation of the settler-colonial ethnocracy known as Eretz Israel, religious and cultural tolerance in the region would unfortunately become a distant memory. Palestine has been referred to by a few other names throughout history, but it has been called Palestine for about 3,000 years now. As early as 5000 B.C.E., there are recorded signs of habitation in the Levantine littoral, present-day Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. However, people would not fully settle down there until about 3200 B.C.E. The first recorded society which settled in this area, which we are currently aware of with modern archaeology, are remembered as the Canaanites, and their land was called Canaan, sometimes pronounced Canaan. These people were similar in culture and language to their northern neighbors, the Phoenicians. They both spoke Western Semitic languages, had flourishing cultures, and practiced polytheistic religions. However, the Canaanites preferred inland settlements as opposed to their Phoenician neighbors. The term Canaanites was given to the people by their Syrian neighbors, but there is little evidence that they ever called themselves by this name. The term Canaan may derive from the ancient Hurrian word kinahu, which is the name for purple or crimson. This color of dye was first produced and exported in large amounts by these quote-unquote crimsonites. They are depicted in the Bible as barbarian idol worshippers, against whom Hebrew people had committed a genocide. But this story must be taken with several grains of salt, as literally no archaeological evidence exists for their quote-unquote violent destruction. More than likely, the biblical story, like most biblical stories, is a parable. An Egyptian story from the 14th century B.C.E. calls the area retinue, but this was a more general term which described the entire coastline of the western Mediterranean. Another name given to the area was Jahi. Around the same time, Jahi, Palestine, was annexed into the Egyptian Empire. Herodotus claims that it was the Egyptians who first spread the practice of circumcision to the people of Palestine. In the mid-12th century B.C.E., about 3,200 years ago, Egyptian sources begin mentioning the area using the term Palestine, but it was likely known by that name prior to Egyptian documentation as well. Palestine became an integral part of Egypt. The 18th dynasty of Egyptian pharaohs even called Gaza their capital. During this spotty era of prehistory, little is recorded by the people of Palestine, but undoubtedly they faced hardship. Their land was sandwiched between the northern Hittite kingdoms, the Arab kingdoms to the southeast, and the Mycenaean Greeks across the seas and to the west. In 1350 BCE, the puppet ruler of Palestine, a man called Abdi-Hepa, sent alarm bells to his overlord, the pharaoh. He beseeched him, quote, "At the feet of the king I have fallen 7 and 7 times. Here is the deed that Milkili and Shuardatu have done against the land. They had led the troops of Gezar against the law of the king. The land of the king has gone over to the Habiru, and now a town belonging to Jerusalem has gone over to the men of Kiltu. May the king listen to Abdi-Hepa your servant, and send archers." Unquote. This message may contain the first mention of the Hebrew people, who may have originally been called the Habiru, but whether this group of people were the original Hebrew people remains disputed. It is widely believed that Habiru may simply translate to bandits, given its context across scriptures. The biblical story claims that the Hebrew patriarch Abraham came from Ur, but some scholars have claimed that the Hebrew people were native to Palestine. Whether this is true or not cannot be confirmed. Additionally, these biblical depictions were likely written by exiled Babylonians hundreds of years after these events supposedly occurred. In any case, Abdi-Hepa's entreaties point to new disturbances on the horizon for Palestine, as well as the rest of the Bronze Age world. These disturbances came in the form of the elusive Sea Peoples, who caused the collapse of several notable Bronze Age civilizations. Upheavals and destructions plagued the Eastern Hemisphere for many generations. During these calamities, a tribe of people calling themselves Hebrews cast away their many idols in place of a single deity without a name, Yahweh. At first, this single god may have been two separate entities, El, a local Canaanite god, and Yahweh, the Hebrew version. In addition to Yahweh, the early Hebrew tribes believed many other gods existed alongside their chosen god. These included gods like Ashur, as well as the gods of the Egyptian pantheon. This belief system is called henotheism. One supreme god is worshipped, but the existence of other less powerful gods is not denied. There are also scholars who have asserted that Judaism was first picked up by Hebrew peoples who worshipped Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, the creator of a monotheistic cult focused on the worship of the sun. Before we go any further into this series, we have to address the fact that most religions began as revolutionary cultural regeneration movements. This is true of both Christianity and Islam, but it is also true for modern Judaism, whose precepts were first developed by Hebrews while they were in exile in Babylon. Judaism was in every way a response to oppression. It was one of the few outlets through which the Hebrew people could maintain their way of life. As for the ancient Hebrews of Palestine, we have no way of truly knowing the way they, or any tribe in the area during that time, worshipped their god/gods. In the countryside, people likely followed a variety of religions, even mixing beliefs from different religions. It seems clear to me that these early biblical stories point to an incredibly diverse society. There are at least a dozen separate tribes and peoples who appear in the Bible and around ancient Palestine, and they all believed in different gods, folklore, etc. The Jebusites, for example, are considered the original founders of the city of Jerusalem. Following the alleged Hebrew conquest, the Bible claims the Jebusites lived alongside the Hebrews, quote, even to this day, unquote. With all this in mind, and going forward in this series, when I say this belief system became the state religion, I mean to say that the nobility and the majority of the ruling classes adopted that belief system. It is very likely that no substantial change was felt in the countryside. Only when a religious ideology seriously took root for hundreds of years did we see a serious change amongst the religious beliefs of everyday Palestinians. This can be seen throughout Palestine's history, whether it was during the period of Byzantine Christian supremacy, the 7th century Arabo-Islamic conquests, or the Hasmonean dynasty of Jewish-Greek proselytizers. The peasantry in Palestine clung to their original religious and cultural practices, and only converted after centuries of occupation and conditioning, or when the alternative was death or exile. The modern Palestinian dialect, as well as the names of cities and villages in the area, serve to confirm that the Palestinian people who inhabit the area today have been there for thousands of years. For example, linguistic experts point to strands of ancient Hebrew and Phoenician languages showing up in the Arabic spoken by Palestinians today. Meanwhile, city names like Gaza are incredibly ancient. The city is even mentioned in the Bible prior to Jerusalem. The biblical story states that the Hebrews were enslaved and deported to Egypt en masse, where they were forced to build opulent structures to honor the Egyptian pharaohs. Allegedly, a Hebrew man named Moses, who had been raised as an Egyptian prince, freed his people and led them on a perilous 40-year voyage through the Sinai Desert to Canaan, the so-called Promised Land of milk and honey. From there, the Bible claims they conquered the land and destroyed numerous tribes, while burning down over 300 cities and villages on their way to their quote-unquote Holy Covenant. Just so we are clear, there is zero evidence to support any exodus of Hebrews, nor is there any evidence of the mass enslavement of Hebrews by the Egyptians. Undoubtedly, Egyptian pharaohs were harsh to conquered peoples, and they likely forced conquered peoples into onerous tasks and duties, but there is no evidence that the Hebrews, a relatively small tribe in a relatively far-off part of Egypt, were especially singled out for harassment. There is also scant evidence that the Egyptians practiced mass deportations like the Assyrians and Babylonians eventually would. Additionally, Palestine, which is called Canaan in the Bible, was under Egyptian occupation at the time. It would have been quite a feat to escape Egypt by moving into another Egyptian-occupied territory. More than likely, the epic of the Exodus of Hebrews was created by Babylonian Jewish rabbinical writers who sought a spiritual myth which would help bind their people to their long-lost homeland. At any rate, Palestine was filled with a variety of peoples. This is evident given the variety of pottery and artistic stylings recovered from this era. Greeks, Egyptians, Hittites, Persians, Phoenicians, and native Palestinians of all tribes and religions traded with one another, turning Palestine into a rich hub for traded goods. Cities like Gaza, Ascalon, and Jerusalem became essential to coastal as well as inland trade routes. In time, these trade routes would form the Silk Road, and eventually they would become the main routes used for transport during the Arab slave trade. Amongst this eclectic group of tribes, the Philistines supposedly arrived with the Sea Peoples, either previous to or alongside the arrival of the Hebrews. However, new archaeological evidence in the form of 3,000-year-old Philistine graves indicate that the coastal Philistines were very much native to the land, and that they had become rich through trading with and befriending the Sea Peoples. Whatever their origin is, the Philistines became one of the most powerful tribes in the region, even challenging the Egyptian military for dominance of Palestine. The Bible states that the Philistines were technologically advanced in warfare. Their soldiers were fitted similarly to Greek heavy infantry, and they carried throwing spears and short swords. The Philistines' main competition for dominance over Palestine was the Hebrew tribe, who fought numerous battles, wars, and campaigns against them. It was a tit-for-tat war of attrition, during which the Ark of the Covenant supposedly fell into the hands of the Philistines, who promptly returned it. As this war progressed, a young Hebrew warrior named David, who may or may not have existed, took up the mantle of the king of the southern Hebrew tribes, while the former king's son took control of the northern tribes. David renamed Jerusalem. It was now the City of David. He also set about forming a mighty kingdom and uniting the Hebrew tribes. Next, he conquered all of Palestine. Trevor N. and R. Ernest Dupuy asserted, quote, David checked, then destroyed resurgent Philistine power. He was successful in recruiting defeated Philistine soldiers, who thenceforth made up a major portion of his army. Unquote. He supposedly captured lands stretching from the Sinai to far beyond the Jordan River. The Bible claims he captured lands as far east as the Euphrates, but there is little evidence to support this bold claim. Many modern-day Zionists still yearn for this quote-unquote glorious kingdom, regardless of the fact that there is little to no evidence to support their claims, and that there are already people living there. As for David, he took many wives and concubines, many of whom practiced different religions, and he went on to have dozens of children. Today we would have called David's quote-unquote kingdom a military dictatorship, ruled by a strong man. When the strong man aged, his children squabbled over the throne. Amon, the eldest, ruled the northern half of the kingdom, while another son, Absalom, used his charisma to draw in warriors and supporters to his banner. Both sons would die in the battles that followed, leaving the two kingdoms without heirs. Solomon, another son of David, was pushed to the forefront by his mother, and he proved capable and bloodthirsty enough to conquer the two Hebrew kingdoms of north and south for the last time in their respective histories. Solomon gained land through violent conquest and used the riches he stole to build a grand temple in Jerusalem, remembered as the First Temple, or Solomon's Temple. Like his father, he had hundreds of wives and concubines. The Bible claims 7,000. Supposedly, Solomon even had an affair with the Queen of Sheba, who gave birth to a son whose progeny went on to rule Ethiopia until the 1970s. Just like his father's, Solomon's kingdom fell into disrepair as the king aged and became more paranoid and tyrannical. At the same time, a resurgent Egyptian dynasty, under a set of Libyan pharaohs, began looking for an excuse to invade their northern neighbors. When a Hebrew general came to Pharaoh Shishak fleeing Solomon's murderous schemes, it was exploited to justify the invasion. Upon arriving, the pharaoh learned that King Solomon was dead, and as a form of tribute, the new king of the southern tribes handed over the gold stashed in the temple. This quote-unquote united kingdom of northern and southern Hebrew tribes endured for maybe 75 to 100 years, but it remained one of the main points that Europeans and Zionists, who claim this biblical story as fact, used to justify their colonization and usurpation of native Palestinian lands. These two Hebrew kingdoms, remembered as the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, were occasionally at war with one another and occasionally allied with each other, but they remained distinct political entities. The northern kingdom of Israel would in time become culturally more Phoenician than Hebrew in terms of their worldviews, art, and textiles. They adopted many aspects of Phoenician life. Most importantly, they incorporated the Phoenician alphabet into their studies, which in time became the Hebrew language. This was the language used to create the Torah, the Talmud, and eventually the Holy Bible. In turn, Phoenicians would become some of the first converts to the new Jewish religion, and they would help spread the belief to every corner of the Mediterranean. In the 9th century B.C.E., a new threat arose. It came in the form of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Based around Nineveh in modern-day Iraq, the Neo-Assyrians set about reconquering their former empire with the intent to greatly expand it. Believing it was their quote-unquote religious duty to conquer the world, they began campaigning west of the Euphrates under King Shalmaneser III, who ruled from 859 to 824 BCE. They came up against a coalition of 11 separate Levantine kings, led primarily by the Aramaic king of Damascus. The allied kings met with the Assyrians near the town of Karkar in modern-day Syria. Shalmaneser claims, quote, "With the supreme forces which assured my Lord had given me, and with the mighty weapons which the divine standard which goes before me had granted me, I fought with them. I decisively defeated them from the city of Karkar to the city of Galzau. I fell with the sword 14,000, their fighting men. Like Adad, the water god, I rained down upon them a devastating flood." Unquote. How true this depiction is remains unclear. In all likelihood, the Assyrian king fabricated his great victory, as we know the Assyrians would be campaigning in Palestine again soon. The moment the Battle of Karkar concluded, the coalition of Levantine kings fell apart and began fighting amongst themselves. King Ahab of the northern kingdom was supposedly killed by an arrow, and after a period of anarchy, the northern kingdom became a largely pagan polity, whose leadership worshipped the Phoenician god Baal. This would not last either. The northern kingdom came under the sway of monotheists once more. However, the fragmented states of Palestine were easily overtaken by the Assyrian Empire. Emperor Asasnirari III claims, quote, "In the 5th year of my rule, I sat down solemnly on my royal throne and called up the country for war. I ordered the numerous army of Assyria to march against Pala'astu, Palestine. I crossed the Euphrates at its flood. As to the numerous hostile kings, I received all the tributes which they brought to Assyria." Unquote. This inscription, known as the Saba'ah stele, continues, quote, "I subdued territory stretching from the bank of the Euphrates, the land of Hatti, the land of Amuru in its entirety, the land of Tyre, the land of Sidon, the land of Humri, the land of Edom, the land of Palastu. As far as the great sea of the setting sun, I imposed tax and tribute upon them." Unquote. In 735 B.C.E., Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III received a letter from his faithful servant Kordi-Asher-Lamor, which stated that he had appointed tax collectors to accost the laborers who brought down lumber from the quote-unquote Lebanon range. He went on to inform the king that he told the same collectors to make sure that the lumber did not find its way, quote, to the Egyptians or Palestinians. Clearly, Tiglath-Pileser was planning something, and in 732 BCE, he invaded and destroyed both Syria and the northern Hebrew kingdom. He threatened to invade Jerusalem and Judah, but ultimately left the state alone as he had other enemies to face. Tiglath-Pileser died in 727, and the remnants of the northern kingdom used the instability created by his death to rebel. Sometime during the 720s, Sargon II usurped the Assyrian throne, then brutally crushed the northern kingdom's rebellion. The southern kingdom chose to submit to the Assyrians. Sargon II deported thousands of people and founded a community for Hebrews in eastern cities like Babylon. In time, Babylonian Hebrews made their way to Baghdad, where the population was, at one point, about 33% Jewish. Many Iraqi and Iranian Jews claim they are descendants of these original deportees. Today, Iranian Jewish peoples are being killed by Israeli and American bombs, all to steal oil. In 705 BCE, Sargon II was killed in battle, and once more, anarchy washed over the Assyrian domain. The people of Palestine rebelled on the side of their Babylonian allies. Unfortunately, their rebellion deeply agitated one of the great monsters of history, king of the world, king of Assyria, Sennacherib. Sennacherib bypassed Jerusalem, the capital city of Judah, and instead sent his forces to besiege and destroy Lachish. The Assyrian army ravaged the city, and to celebrate their conquest, they constructed a bas-relief, or large rock carving, depicting the battle outside the walls and the enslavement of the city's population. Such claims were sometimes Assyrian propaganda, but there is ample archaeological evidence which points to a horrible fate for thousands of the city's inhabitants. Archaeologists have found a mass grave of 1,500 men, women, and children, some of whom were skinned. Others were impaled. Sennacherib and the Assyrian army went on to defeat an Egyptian army which had been sent to relieve Judah. Then the Assyrians besieged Jerusalem itself. The Bible tells us that, quote, God saved the city, unquote, when he released a plague onto the Assyrians, which eviscerated their forces and forced their retreat. But Sennacherib tells a very different story. He asserts that he demanded a crushing tribute of gold and silver and boasted about deporting over 200,000 people. The new leaders of Jerusalem practiced a violent form of paganism. The plains outside the city became a place of child sacrifice. Its leaders would offer their own sons to the god Moloch. As this deplorable violence and death ravaged the infants and children of Jerusalem, a massive upheaval was occurring in the once mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire. Chaldean general Nabopolassar seized the city of Babylon and allied himself with the Medes, a tribe located in modern-day western Iran. This marked the beginning of the Babylonian or Chaldean Empire. Over the course of generations, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was whittled down until only the capital of Nineveh remained. In 612 or 609 B.C.E., the city was captured, and Assyria ceased to exist. The people of Palestine likely breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, there was no way they could have known that another depraved and violent man was on the way to their land. Before that happened, the coastal Philistines as well as the inland Judeans were in the middle of a golden age. In the lands of the Philistines, who inhabited much of the coast from Gaza to Jaffa to the Litani River, merchants, tradesmen, and traffickers became rich from trading goods and trafficking people between 3 continents. Meanwhile, Palestinian farmers grew olive and fig trees, which they used to make world-renowned food and oils. In time, the olive tree would become the national symbol of Palestine, as well as Palestinian resistance to Zionism and settler-colonialism. Native Palestinian olive trees are especially targeted for destruction by the IDF. Since 1967, millions of olive trees have been intentionally destroyed and uprooted by Israeli forces. Back in the 5th century B.C.E., Palestine developed hard money for the first time, remembered as Philistino-Arabian coins. This currency was used throughout the land, and as the name implies, it found its way to the Arabian Peninsula. Each Palestinian city controlled its own domestic affairs. It was a similar situation in Greece, where city-states held sway. In the inland state of Judea, a semi-messianic figure named Josiah controlled the statelet, and he changed the state religion back to a monotheistic one. Sometime during his reign, he received the ancient scrolls which were said to have been the original copy of the book of Deuteronomy. These scrolls were likely written by exiles from the former northern kingdom. During Josiah's reign, Judea supposedly expanded north and east, forming a militant state in the process. They received military backing from the Babylonian Empire. In 609 B.C.E., the Egyptians sent an army into Judea, and during the Battle of Megiddo, Josiah and thousands of his troops were killed. The battle was so traumatic that the word Armageddon was derived from it. The Egyptians were too late to assist the last remnants of the Assyrian state, which were smashed by the armies of Babylonian general and future king Nebuchadnezzar. Assyria was annexed into the Babylonian Empire, which inherited Judea as their tributary. However, In 597 BCE, the leaders of Judea declared a rebellion against their new Babylonian overlords. King Nebuchadnezzar would strike back violently. He marched on Jerusalem and stomped out the rebellion. The Hebrew king who had rebelled was forced to watch his children be murdered in front of him before he was permanently blinded and imprisoned for the rest of his life. Nebuchadnezzar placed the former king's uncle on the throne, but he too rebelled. The Babylonian king had had enough. For 18 months, his armies ravaged the Judean countryside, while his siege engines drew ever closer to Jerusalem's walls. In August of 586 BCE, the Babylonians broke into the city, which caught fire during the assault. They killed many, deported many more, and destroyed the first temple, which had been the center of Hebrew life for centuries. They annexed Judea directly into their empire and renamed the former statelet Yehud. This is likely the origin of the word Jewish. Hebrew communities deported to Babylon then developed the synagogue, as well as the foundations of the modern Jewish religion, which spread across the world due to proselytization efforts. The Babylonian Empire would remain a relevant world force for many decades, but by the end of the rule of their mad king Nabonidus, the Babylonians were being usurped by the Medes. The Medes would supplant Babylon as a major power in 539 BCE. In Palestine, historians like Herodotus gave their first impressions of the land and its territory. In the 400s BCE, Herodotus, who many call the father of history, wrote, quote, "Then the Medes fought with the Scythians, and having been worsted in the battle, they lost their power, and the Scythians obtained rule over all Asia. They went on to invade Egypt, and when they were in Syria, which is called Palestine, Pasmaticus, king of Egypt, met them, and by gifts and entreaties he turned them from their purpose, so they could not advance any further." Unquote. Herodotus goes on to say that some of the same Scythians went on to pillage a temple to Aphrodite in the Palestinian city of Ascalon, and their descendants were punished, quote, "with a disease which made them women instead of men." Unquote. While the second half of this story is hard to believe, the first half seems very probable, and it speaks to the immense amount of religious diversity which has always been present in Palestine throughout its long history. Herodotus mentions Palestine and specific Palestinian cities several other times throughout his histories. He even asserts that he was present in Palestine during a column-raising ceremony honoring the contemporary Egyptian pharaoh. Herodotus takes special care to emphasize the specific geographical differences between Phoenicia, Palestine, Egypt, and Syria. Never once in his writings does he mention the Hebrew people, the Jewish religion, Judea, or even the city of Jerusalem. To be fair, we do not know exactly where Herodotus traveled in Palestine, but the fact that none of these peoples, places, or belief systems are mentioned shows that most people did not associate the land with the relatively small number of inland monotheists, but with the seafaring traders of Philistine. To be clear, the Hebrews and later Jewish people were always a part of historic Palestine in some form or fashion, but they were always just that, a part of a larger whole. This is best showcased in Ptolemy I's world map, where Judea is just a small area inside of a larger Palestina. About 100 years after Herodotus, Aristotle talks about Palestine and the famous Dead Sea. He writes, quote, "There is a lake in Palestine, such that if you bind a man or beast and throw it in, it floats and does not sink. They say that this lake is so bitter and salt that no fish live in it, and that if you soak clothes in it and shake them, it cleans them." Unquote. Back in the mid-6th century B.C.E., the Medes had just defeated the Babylonian Empire and looted their riches. However, all was not well in their domain. The Median king, Astyages, woke one morning having just experienced an odd dream. He claimed he saw his daughter urinating over the whole of Asia. Deeply puzzled, he turned to his court magicians, who believed this dream was a warning and that Astyages should be wary of his future grandchildren. Astyages took these warnings seriously, and instead of marrying his daughter to one of the Medes, he gave her to Cambyses, a Persian. The Persian tribe was viewed as quote-unquote lesser than the Medes. Astyages believed he had solved his dilemma, but a year into his daughter's marriage, he dreamed a vine grew from his daughter's womb, which, once again, encompassed all of Asia. This time, the Magi's interpretation was clear. The vine symbolized his daughter's offspring, who would usurp the Median throne. Something had to be done. Astyages ordered an underling to dispose of the newborn. The underling ordered a peasant couple to take care of it. But the peasants had just given birth to a stillborn, and as they were overcome with grief, they decided to raise the child as their own. This child would grow to become Cyrus the Great, the first sovereign of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Is the above story true? Probably not, but it does demonstrate the level of reverence which was given to Cyrus, who changed the Eastern Hemisphere by creating a vast empire, largely through compromise, local autonomy, and religious freedom. The story continues on to say that Cyrus grew into an impetuous and stern youth. Astyages somehow realized who this boy was, and he blamed his underling for failing to kill him as a baby. He called his underling, Harpagus, to a grand feast, at which Astyages fed Harpagus's own son to him. The horrified Harpagus left the dinner with his son's remains and swore vengeance. When the ruler of the Persians, Cambyses, died, Cyrus returned to claim his birthright. He allied himself with Harpagus and overthrew his grandfather's kingdom. Upon uniting the Medes and Persians, Cyrus began looking for profitable conquests. First, he destroyed the empire of Lydia in western Turkey. The Lydian king, Croesus, amassed such wealth that "rich as Croesus" remains a well-known saying to this day. Following his defeat, Croesus was likely made an advisor to Cyrus, and by some accounts he served the emperor faithfully until his death. Cyrus used the wealth pilfered from Lydia to launch a new military campaign, this time against the remnants of the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonians were no match for the Persians, and they submitted to Cyrus. With their submission, Cyrus gained Palestine as a tributary. The Persian Empire, which stretched from the Indus River to the borders of Europe and Africa, was a crucial development for the nation-state, and it also contributed greatly to globalization efforts. For the first time in Eurasia, a single centralized entity strove to standardized measurements, timekeeping, etc., over a vast multi-ethnic empire. It was a huge change, which laid the groundwork for the future empires of Macedonia and Rome. Religiously, the Persians worshipped Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and they believed that all existence was a never-ending battle between good and evil. It was due to this universal religious messaging that Cyrus strove to be a just leader. This did not mean he was incapable of despicable acts of violence. For example, when the city of Sardis rebelled against his rule, he ruthlessly slaughtered thousands of the city's inhabitants as an act of collective punishment. Cyrus also allowed thousands of Jewish people who had been living in Babylon to emigrate to Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple which had long been destroyed. To be clear, not every Hebrew in Babylon moved to Palestine. Shlomo Sand asserts that the majority stayed put. Others chose to emigrate to Egypt, where they founded a flourishing pre-biblical community of uncircumcised Jewish people on a place called Elephantine Island. This flourishing settlement of Jewish people was likely more vast than the population of Jewish people in Palestine. The Babylonians who chose to emigrate to Palestine brought the Jewish religion with them, and perhaps the first copies of the Torah and Hebrew Bible. This new, stringent, liturgically based form of Judaism would become the norm, but, at least at first, there was plenty of debate between rabbinical Jewish believers and the Palestinian Hebrews. Cyrus the Great's rule ended violently at the hands of a grieving mother. The story is that Cyrus invaded the domain of Tomyrus, the queen of the Massagetae tribe, which is located in Central Asia. Through trickery, Cyrus captured her lead general, who was also her only son. Her son, refusing to be taken alive, killed himself. In the ensuing battle, the Massagetae and their horse archers destroyed the armies of Persia, killing Cyrus in the maelstrom. Tomyrus ordered the Persian Shah-in-Shah to be decapitated, and holding Cyrus's severed head, she wailed, quote, "I live, and have conquered you in fight, and yet by you am I ruined, for you took my son with guile." Unquote. As she said this, she tossed his head into a pool of human blood, and stated, quote, "Thus I make good on my threat, and give you your fill of blood." Unquote. Today, Cyrus is remembered as one of the first true statesmen of the ancient world. He is a celebrated figure in the Bible, and because of that, he is a celebrated figure in Zionist historiography. In 1953, the former President of the United States, Harry Truman, shouted, quote, "I am Cyrus," unquote, when asked about his contributions to the creation of the modern state of Israel. Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, would also meet an ignoble end. He attempted to emulate his father's conquest by subduing Egypt. This he achieved relatively easily. Unfortunately for him, his brother began a rebellion against him. While Cambyses II was en route to face his brother, he died mysteriously around Gaza, likely from poisoning. The man who may have killed him, Darius, was elevated to the position of Shah-in-Shah, or King of Kings. Aided by his co-conspirators, Darius put down numerous rebellions across the width of the empire. In 518 B.C.E., he marched through Palestine and likely executed the last of the quote-unquote Davidian kings, Zerubbabel. The reason for this remains elusive. In 515, the Second Temple was officially consecrated. It was much smaller than the first, but it would last even longer. Throughout Persian overlordship, the various cities of Palestine maintained their own statelets, which all swore loyalty and tribute to the Persian Empire. Darius would attempt to invade Greece in 490 BC, but he was met by a coalition of Greek city-states who swamped the Persian army before they could disembark from their boats. Remembered as the Battle of Marathon, it was the most serious defeat Darius would ever suffer. He never lived long enough to avenge this failure, but he always remembered it. Instead, his son Xerxes invaded Greece with a massive force, only to squander his advantage at the battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. In the fallout after the Persian Wars, the Greek city-states of Athens and Sparta became bitter rivals. They engaged in a several decades-long, on-again, off-again war. In the end, Sparta would come out on top, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. A threat from people long considered by the Greeks to be so-called northern barbarians would prove to be more unstoppable than any force which came before it. Under their first notable monarch, Philip II, the foundation of the Macedonian Empire was laid. However, his death at the hands of an assassin in 336 BCE opened the door for his son, Alexander, to take power. Remembered as Alexander the Great, he would claim to be the next Cyrus, But it would soon become apparent that this young tyrant would bring crucifixions, enslavement, and slaughter to Palestine and its people. He would also usher in a period of Hellenistic cultural expansion, which would help change the world forever. Our next episode will cover the rise of Alexander, Alexander's successor kingdoms, as well as the Roman Republic's first forays into Palestine. I'm your host, Joseph Pascone, and before I conclude today's episode, I need to give a very special shout-out to two small businesses in the Henderson, Nevada area, which were a great help to Melissa and me when we were looking for sources for this massive series. The first is Mad Red Books, an independently owned bookstore. The second is Mad House Coffee. Thank you both so much for the books. And thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day.
If you like what you heard today, you can support us by donating on PayPal at Turning Tides Podcast 1. We would also appreciate it if you take the time to rate and review Turning Tides on whatever platform you use to listen, and share the show with your family and friends. It really helps us bring the show to more listeners. Thank you so much for the support, and thanks again for listening.